I just completed the first episode of The Bad Batch entitled Aftermath. With that said, one of the most interesting parts of The Bad Batch show is it finally canonically explains in clear detail why Palpatine and the Empire as a whole decided to stop using clone troopers, and instead began to rely on an enlistment force which would one day become the Stormtroopers. So welcome back to the channel everybody, and let's talk about the big canon changes that The Bad Batch has made, as well as answering a question that we've all had for some time about Star Wars canon. That being why Palpatine stopped using the clone. Although we've always had a pretty clear answer as to why Palpatine stopped using the clone troopers, believing that the genetic material of Jango Fett had been spread too thin, the Bad Batch also gives us various other explanations that tie directly into Order 66. In all of the Bad Batch, we can see that the regular clones, or as Clone Force 99 calls them, regs, are displaying behavior far uncommon from what we see from the clone troopers in the Clone Wars series. They become far more aggressive, and as Dave Filoni put it when he was talking about Season 7 in Order 66, the regs become far more droid-like and less combatively viable, something that Dave Filoni even stated. Part of what made the clone troopers so much more deadly than droids was their ability to free think. Obviously not on the level of a Clone Force 99, but still think more clearly than a droid can. This was in major parts why the clone troopers were so efficient and effective during the Clone Wars. Once Order 66 was enacted though, this was changed, and the combative viability of the clones overall was altered, a sacrifice that Palpatine was very clearly willing to make. The first episode gives us a unique perspective on the clones, as it's revealed that it was immediately following the events of Revenge of the Sith and the death of the Separatist Council that Palpatine directly ordered that the clones be decommissioned. By decommissioned, I do not mean that current clone troopers were still not in the ranks of the Empire. I mean that the clone Kaminoans were ordered to stop producing new clones, with Tarkin explaining to the Kaminoan scientists that it would cost approximately half to have a galactic enlistment service, and would result in more troopers in service of the Empire. Tarkin even mentions that the pre-existing contracts with the Kaminoans to produce clone troopers was with the Republic, and that the Republic no longer exists with the rise of the Galactic Empire. Tarkin explains to the Kaminoan cloners he's been sent to evaluate the clone, and to guarantee that the clones still maintain the combative viability that they had prior, something that has now come into question, and a brand new small detail added to canon. The idea that Order 66 being initiated has made the clone troopers less effective warriors and more bloodthirsty, as we see several times during the Bad Batch, with Hunter and Tech both noting that their brothers are behaving differently on Kamino. Another one of the major reasons why Palpatine stopped the production of clone troopers was because he believed that it led directly to the plan of the Sith, and that upon investigation this would soon be discovered. Therefore, he ceased production of all clone troopers. Obviously though, this doesn't mean that there weren't still clones within Imperial ranks, as within the Tarkin novel, which takes place 5 years after the events of Revenge of the Sith, there are still clones present within the Imperial ranks. As the Bad Batch explains, the only reason that the clone troopers were decommissioned by the Empire was because of economical terms. In Legends continuity, it was the fear that the clones could actually be reprogrammed following Order 66, which of course they would be, even by the Kaminoans themselves, who became disillusioned with the Empire and actually used the Jango Fett template against the Imperial ranks. That is what, in Legends continuity, caused Palpatine to completely cut off the clone production of the Jango Fett clone. In canon though, the answer is a little bit less dramatic. In canon, the result of not continuing with the Jango Fett template was largely a result of Tarkin, who was sent to Kamino directly to oversee the clone troopers and to determine if they were in fact viable both financially and as warriors to continue working among the Empire. Something that is seldom talked about in Star Wars though is that the clone army and producing it actually bankrupt the entire Republic, as producing a single clone was so exponentially more expensive than enlisting someone that was already ready. The fact of the matter that many Star Wars fans seem to forget is that the clones were never actually meant to win the Clone Wars, and Palpatine kept the clone numbers as diminished as possible. The clones were only set in place to ensure that the Empire could rise successfully. It was never the intention of the clone troopers or their creators for them to operate and control the Empire once the Jedi were overthrown. It was the sole goal of the clone troopers to weaken the Jedi Order, and to make it appear as if Palpatine was in fact the hero of the Clone Wars. Another important reason was the fact that Jango Fett's DNA supply was running extremely low, meaning that the clone troopers that were bred near the end of the Clone Wars were far less effective than the clones bred during the beginning, like Captain Rex and Commander Cody. Essentially, the clones were replaced because they were not designed to subdue an empire. They were made to secure its formation by eliminating the Jedi. The clones were admittedly far more effective than stormtroopers, but were simply not economical enough to subdue the Imperial population. They were not meant to be maintainable. Natural-born stormtroopers provided a less effective but cheaper solution, which allowed Imperial planets to be garrisoned sufficiently while still leaving enough money in the budget for government services, such as Death Stars. The unfortunate truth of the clone troopers, as was briefly explained in the Bad Batch, is they were simply not economically viable enough to continue their production. Something that I've absolutely loved about Star Wars is it certainly takes real-world elements and introduces it effectively into the story. When you watch Star Wars, especially a show like the Bad Batch, you don't expect to talk about economics in a video following, but you end up doing so, which is awesome. Seldom times we forget just how expensive the production of the clone army really was, and how Palpatine was simply trying to cut costs by introducing natural-born soldiers into the ranks of the Empire. Legends continuity becomes far more fantastical, explaining clone uprising and rebellion, but canon really keeps it grounded, and I was honestly shocked to see this implemented into the Bad Batch show. Tarkin talking about economical costs with the Kaminoans and why production of the clone army simply doesn't make sense for the Empire from a financial standpoint. Anyway guys, what are your thoughts on this? And what are your thoughts on why Palpatine decided not to use clone troopers after the Empire rose? And were you shocked to see this as a story beat which showed up in the Bad Batch? Anyway my friends, thank you guys so much for watching. Happy May the 4th. I hope you guys have a great day and stay tuned for more Star Wars content.